Look, I'm gonna cut right to the chase here. Suicide Squad's really good. I think that one of the reasons this movie is getting so much love, or at least one of the reasons I found it so fun, was just how different tonally it is than most superhero movies. Now, I am someone who I enjoy the MCU for the most part. I have my criticisms of it. Obviously, it's very formulaic. People know that. That's just kind of a thing that we all accept, and that's fine. I personally did not enjoy Black Widow very much at all. And that movie's going to come up again later. I'll get to my point there. But one of the things I love about this movie, The Suicide Squad, is how different it feels from every other superhero movie on the market. DC has had its troubles, let's say. The last movie video I made on this channel was about how I did not enjoy Wonder Woman 1984 at all, and how I thought that movie was legitimately, a word I don't use to describe things very often, legitimately awful. Like, it is a bad film. The only charming bit about it to me is that it's ridiculously bad, and it's so silly bad that there's a little bit of charm to it, not a lot, not that I want to rewatch it, but it's funny bad. This movie is charming in the way you want a movie to be charming, and that it's just very charismatic. There's so much character going on. It's so charismatic in ways that we've not experienced. You know, we've had our MCU movies, right? Those usually have, with a few exceptions, around the same tone, right? They're pretty fun. They're lighthearted mostly. There might be some action, but it's nothing more than, standard PG-13 action movie stuff. We've also had things in the past go super dark, like The Dark Knight, which is my favorite superhero movie of all time. Things like Logan, which is almost more of a Western, which I adore. I love Logan as well. But we've seen DC try and recreate the tone of those Nolan movies without Christopher Nolan to varying levels of goodness. I think no matter who you ask, they've had some hits and they've had some misses, more misses than hits post-Nolan. This movie, though, feels completely different than anything else DC has released, I guess with the exception of Birds of Prey. If we're gonna view these movies on like a volume knob of like ridiculousness and sort of camp and silliness and just saturation of ideas and fun and weirdness almost, I would say Birds of Prey, which is another movie I really enjoyed. I really like that movie coming out of the theater. I would say Birds of Prey is like a 4 or a 5. This movie is a 10 and maybe Spinal Tap 11. The Suicide Squad hinges on surrealism at times in a really interesting way. So obviously this film is from James Gunn, and people are going to make a lot of comparisons from the Guardians franchise to this, and that's understandable, right? Guardians is sort of the James Gunn vehicle that I think most people have seen, myself included, and obviously the parallels between, a group of outcasts come together to fight for, one whole, and you maybe aren't familiar with some of these characters, but by the end you'll be feeling for them. That is present in both of those movies for sure. I would say this movie is almost more of an accomplishment in that way than Guardians, because Guardians, really at the core of it, there are 6 characters that you need to care about. In this, there are a lot more characters. Obviously, there are ones that get the focus and the shine and ones that don't, but I honestly cared about Polka Dot Man, which is a feat in and of its own. So I guess I should talk about my history with comics and specifically with DC. So I grew up, my foray into comics, my introduction into comics was Batman, the animated series, and Batman Beyond. They used to run them on whatever channel. I think it was like Warner Brothers Kids, but it was probably on like CBS or something. So they used to run those shows, and like the Justice League cartoon. They had all those shows on TV when I was a kid, and I obviously was hooked. I have since gone on to read a lot of Batman comics, which most of those comics back there are Batman. There's a little Batman Funko Pop there. And most of my big comics phases have centered around Batman. In high school, I kept up with New 52 Batman religiously. That's also when I started reading New 52 Suicide Squad. I started reading New 52 Harley Quinn. That was probably the most I was into comics. I've had several waves, as I think most people do with different hobbies. But my love of superheroes is directly tied to the Batman universe, which obviously the Suicide Squad is taking place in. So I may be a little biased toward this. I am notoriously a little higher on, and I say a little, I don't think it's a great movie by any stretch, a little bit higher on the 2016 Suicide Squad, simply because I loved seeing Harley Quinn, who outside of Joker is my favorite Batman villain. come to life with Margot Robbie's performance, who I think was incredible as Harley Quinn. I think she is one of the maybe only bright points of that movie, and a consistent bright spot throughout all of these movies. Her performance in this newest movie is great. I do like that they don't lean on her as much in this film, though. Like, they definitely let other characters shine equally to Harley. I think because Birds of Prey exists, which is more of a strictly Harley vehicle, that it kind of was a little bit refreshing to see, oh, Harley is in this and has her own storyline and definitely is a big character in this, but also there are several scenes without her that are just as strong and just as charismatic and funny. It doesn't feel like a huge drop-off when you go from scenes with Harley to scenes without, like in the first one. I almost hesitate to make a lot of reference to the first film, simply because it's such a low bar to clear. Like, I watched it, so it's on HBO Max. That's how I watched it with a group of friends in my living room. After the movie was over, one of my friends was like, oh my god, that was so much better than the first one. And I thought that was almost not insulting to this movie, but it doesn't do it justice, right? So many films are better than the first Suicide Squad that it almost doesn't showcase this movie's greatness in a lot of ways. James Gunn is going full James Gunn in this movie too, which I enjoy. One of the criticisms I've seen is that there are too many needle drops. If you don't know what a needle drop is, that's just any time in a movie where the music becomes kind of the focus, like a song, a licensed song is brought in. Obviously, this is a hallmark of the Guardians movies. They do it quite a bit. I would say they only do it 3 to 4 times really in the Suicide Squad, but music plays a big role in, I think, a lot of James Gunn projects. Certain directors lean that way, right? Edgar Wright, obviously, Baby Driver is probably needle drop the movie. But like, I love those kind of things as someone who loves music and has a record collection. Like, I think those are just fun, and I think that's the biggest energy of this movie, is that it's just fun. It also is fun for adults. I don't know that this is a superhero movie that you want your kid watching. Depends on the age, obviously. I would take my 16-year-old little sister to see it, but I don't know that I would show this movie to a 10-year-old because it is R-rated, and it takes full advantage of that. It's weird to say this, but the gruesomeness of the kills, and both of, obviously, the members of the Suicide Squad, some of them are going to die, but the people that they're attacking as well, the gruesomeness of those kills is weirdly refreshing because we're so used, or at least I'm so used now, to Marvel. You know, the best example of this that I can think of right off the top of my head is in Black Widow, where a character literally gets stabbed and like the knife is either twisted or like slid across. Like there's an extra motion there after the person gets stabbed, and then all we see is them lying on the ground in a tank top, and there's just like a dried blood stain, and that's it. There's no blood flowing, there's no blood pooling around them, it's just this little dried blood stain. So because the violence we're used to seeing in superhero movies is so muted and, you know, cleaned up, I should say, in a way that kids can see it and not really think about it too much, this movie does not do that. There are gruesome special effects and really, I won't say gory, because to me that means something that's almost too far. I think the kills in this are very visceral, but I think they fit the tone of the movie. That's something I love about this movie too, is that it knows exactly what it is. To bring back Black Widow, I put a pin in it, I'm removing the pin, I'm bringing it back in. A lot of times now with movies, I grade them more on, can I tell what you were going for tonally? How well did you execute that tone? Were there things you could have done to communicate that tone or execute that tone better? For example, Black Widow, to me, one of the reasons I didn't enjoy that movie is I never quite knew what they were going for. Was it formulaic Marvel movie? Was it more of like a spy thriller? It never really decided on either of those two things. It kind of wanted to be a hybrid of both, and for me that did not connect at all. I think those two realms are a little too different to sort of hybridize. Like, I think that movie, to steal a line from, I think it was the Red Letter Media Review, it's too boring for kids, but it's too cartoonish for adults, especially in the second half. So that part of it just never really landed with me. For this, it is a balls to the wall, we're gonna throw everything at everything, we're gonna make use of this R rating, we're gonna be super fun and colorful and vibrant. You know, it's almost like this weird palate cleanser from other DC movies. it's such a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways, even though it's not this squeaky clean thing. It's not refreshing in a way that's like, oh, it's a great movie to show the whole family. No, it's the opposite. It's refreshing because the tone is so different. And I actually think this could be the flag bearer for how DC differentiates itself from Marvel. This is one of the first projects that they've done, maybe since the Nolan films for me, that felt like DC was its own thing entirely and not really trying to steal from Marvel. Not just trying to recreate the Marvel formula, but instead saying, we're gonna tell weirder stories, we're gonna do wackier shit. Obviously, Joker was something completely different as well, but I don't think that tone works. Arguably, I don't know if that tone works in that movie, but I definitely don't think that tone works in whole for all of your franchises. Whereas this, maybe you don't go R-rated, but the visual effects that they're doing, the visual storytelling is fantastic in this movie. The camera work is great. I kept noticing several times how good the shots were. I don't remember from Guardians. It's a little bit harder to remember because I haven't seen it in a while, but also that movie is way more CG than this. I don't remember the cinematography being as good in Guardians as it is in this movie. Like, it's a really, really cool thing to look at. Specifically, they are very creative in the way they depict combat. Everything feels like a set piece, and obviously this channel focuses on gaming mostly. A lot of the set pieces remind me of the really cool video game set pieces, right? Where it's super iconic, sticks in your head. Like, the first thing I think of is like Uncharted set pieces, where all of them have sort of the same end goal, basically one of our characters or several of our characters fighting either bad guys or each other or whatever, right? But they tell those stories in such interesting ways every time that it never feels repetitive, and instead it's more exciting. Like, okay, what is the fight scene we're getting next? They make really clever use of the cameras and the props around them. If you've seen the movie, there's a fight scene that I'm thinking of specifically involving sort of reflections that I think is really, really cool and clever. But the entire combat of the movie is silly in a fun way, and like, I watched this with 4 of my friends, and you had 5 adults in a living room going, oh, like, excitedly to the combat because it's so brutal in a way that is so different than what you normally expect from superhero movies. I also think this movie does a great job of depicting its characters. I kind of touched on this already, but caring about someone like Polka Dot Man or Ratcatcher 2, who I had no idea who, like, I've read a lot, I would say quite a bit of Suicide Squad. Ratcatcher 2 never stuck with me, or I might not have even heard of that character, and yet that's one of the better characters in this movie. James Gunn is so good about making you care about characters that he's kind of the perfect fit to write this movie. I will also say they do not shy away from the name Suicide Squad. I'm not going to get into any further than that because it's obviously spoilery, but they are surprising in the amount of like, oh yeah, we're doing this, that you get in this film. So that's cool too. Overall, I think this film is just really, really fun. The performances are great. I haven't really touched on the performances much because I think you know what you're getting through most of this. I think people are going to be talking about, and apologies if I butcher this name, Daniela Melchior, who is the person who plays Ratcatcher 2. I think people are going to be talking about her performance because she is so understated and like cool in the way that all of these other cartoony characters around her aren't. That she's a great foil for everyone else. Like, maybe not to the point where you ascribe yourself to her, but she definitely is sort of the straight man. She is the Abbott to all 15 Costellos around her, which is a testament to her acting ability. I've never seen her in anything, admittedly, but I thought she was great. Obviously, Margot Robbie's great in everything she's ever been in. I'm a huge Margot Robbie fan. Like, Idris Elba and Viola Davis, you already know they're badass actors, and they're great in this because they're great in everything. Viola Davis as Amanda Waller, I think, is a really great casting for Waller. Viola obviously gets to act more in other things. You know, Amanda Waller's basically a one-note character, but Viola Davis does that character really well, and I'm sure gets paid handsomely, so it's great. But, you know, she doesn't have, like, her Ma Rainey's Black Bottom acting shoes on at this point, but, you know, she's great in that role. Idris Elba's great. John Cena, my boy, I love wrestling. So good in this. I think people are going to be I think the two people are going to talk about most are Daniela, who I mentioned earlier, and John Cena. I think John Cena is going to surprise some people in this with how well he pulls off the Peacemaker role, and just how different that character is from the image we have of him, especially as wrestling fans. So I'm excited for people to see Cena in this. My overall thoughts are I really, really, really like this movie. If I had to give it a score, sometimes I like to let a movie settle a little bit more. I watched this yesterday, but right now I'm thinking like a 9.5-ish. 10s to me, I think the only real critique I have of this movie, and it's not a heavy one because tonally I don't think it was what it was going for. I don't think that this movie has a lot of emotional weight, but again, I don't think that was the goal. But at the same time, there isn't that swell of... There were characters we all cared about as a group for sure, but it doesn't have the heights of like a Logan or a Dark Knight. But again, that's not what this movie's going for, so it's kind of weird to hold that against it. But at the same time, if I have to criticize it for one thing, maybe there isn't quite that level of attention to detail on one specific character that you're really, really supposed to root for. Instead, it is more of a, here's reasons to care about all of these characters, which I think works well. I think, obviously, I really, really enjoy this movie. It is one of the best superhero movies I've ever seen, and that's probably as high of an approval as I can get it. This is in the top 5, I would say easily in the top 5 superhero movies that I've seen, and I've seen, I think, all but a couple MCU movies. The only one I don't think I've seen off the top of my head is Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I really, really like this film, and I think you will too. I think you're going to enjoy it. If you know going in that it is a little bit darker, it is a little bit campier, it's bright and fun and different, I think if you like all of those things, you're definitely going to enjoy this.